In today's video, we are going to be filling out the vacant land contract. So understanding how to do this and doing this properly is so important, and a lot of people don't do it right. Even realtors. Like, I've gotten offers from realtors where they don't check off certain things, or they forget to fill in certain things, or they don't understand what certain things mean. So I'm going to kind of go through the contract. I'll go through it pretty quickly just so you can get a better idea of exactly how to fill these out the right way, what you need to do, what you can skip, what's okay to skip, all that good stuff. So first off, when you're doing vacant land, we'll just start right from the top. We're going to take this property right here. I'm going to use it as an example just because I own it. So it's going to be easier to share, information with the video. So first thing you're going to do is you can copy the address and start by pasting the address right into here. And obviously you may not be using the, FAR bar contract or whatever. You may use, a little bit more of a seller friendly contract, maybe a 2-page, 3-page, 4-page agreement. But going through this and understanding how to fill this out will make these smaller contracts easier to fill out. So first off, I'm using PropStream as the external source for where we're getting this information from. So for seller name, we're just going to use Advanced Solutions. So it matches PropStream. Buyer, you would just use your company name. So maybe 123 Investments LLC. So now down here, you're going to find the legal description. And this is actually important to have in here. And you can get it right from PropStream right here. So you just paste that in. And then now line 11, so the section, the township. So right here, the APN, this is what you really need to have in there. This is the important thing to include, and you're going to include it right over here. So the property ID. And you don't necessarily need to fill in these specifics right here. You can get away with just putting in the property ID. And then what I like to always do is include the county. So this one is in Charlotte County. So we're going to go ahead and include that in there. APN's right here as well. You can find it in a couple different areas in here. You may even be able to find it under the tax information. Yeah, there's the parcel ID right there. And then, the county. But you can find that in a couple spots as well. So now that we got that filled in, you're going to go down here and you're going to go to your offer price. So let's just say for the sake of a deal, we're going to put $10,000 as our offer price for this one. And then you do want to always include the contact information for the title company that you're using, just because that's going to be, transparent with the seller. You want the seller to kind of understand what they're looking at. So in there, I'll kind of fill in, my go-to title company. So Jack Panko, Marla. I copy and paste. I have this through my notes. It saves me a lot of time just because I do this very often. Yeah, so we'll include that. And then you would put the title agent's email right there. So now you come down here to deposits. This is your, earnest money, your good faith, whatever you want to refer to it as. Typically, I'm always checking off line 23 right here. So it will be delivered to the escrow agent within. I leave this blank usually, and then you would put the earnest money deposit. I always like to put, anywhere between like $200 to $1,000, depending on the size of the deal. Larger deals equals larger deposits. So if this was a $50,000 purchase, I might do like a $5,000 earnest money. Now, one thing you do have the option to do if you're looking to wholesale this property and you may not have money to submit an earnest money deposit is, I know I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, but you could do something like 10 days in here to give yourself 10 days to deposit it and have it kind of match your inspection period, which we'll get to later in the video. So that's a good way, a good workaround so you don't have any skin in the game early on, especially if you don't have the money to do so. And then in here, it'll automatically calculate the balance. So the balance down here, line 30 and 31, is just your purchase price minus your deposit. This is how much would be owed at closing before tax prorations, closing costs, and all that good stuff. So next thing right here is time of acceptance. This is how long everyone has to sign the contract before it expires. So in here right now, today's date is the 29th. So what I typically do is I like to give a few days. So maybe I would put May 3rd, just so they have time to review it, time to go through it. You don't want them to feel rushed, but you also don't want to give them 3 weeks to make a decision. Maybe if you're the buyer for it, maybe you're only buying so many number of land, and you don't want to commit yourself to a bunch of different contracts at once. So that's for that. And then down here, closing date. So this one's important. So it's tempting to just put in, 30 days out maybe. So you put May 31st, but that gives no flexibility because that states this transaction will close on May 31st. So let's say the seller is ready to close sooner, which most of the time they are, and you're ready to buy sooner, or you've assigned the contract and they want to close sooner. Like I know me as a buyer, I always want to close as soon as I can. So on here, what will give you flexibility is if you put something like on or before 5/31/2024. So now what this does is this gives you plenty of flexibility to where not only you, but title as well. So let's say on the 31st, title has 10 different closings that day and they'd prefer to close on the 30th. You would need an addendum to the contract to close sooner, technically. Or you just put on or before, and now title can close whenever they want. They can close on the 24th, 28th, 30th, whenever they want to close because you have that language in there and it doesn't hold you to a specific date. So a contractual agreement would state on or before. That gives everyone flexibility to close whenever they're ready. So that's one thing I always do. And, let that be the one key takeaway from this video. So next is the financing portion of the contract. And what you're going to do on there is we're just going to go with buyer will pay cash for the property. No financing contingency. That's pretty much always going to be your go-to for land. Buying land on financing is usually another way of saying that you overpaid for land with good terms. I recommend always checking off this one, that you're going to pay cash. So next, this one is key right here. Number 7, assignability. So you get 3 options on here. Number 1, you may assign and thereby be released. That one just seems, kind of weird. So we're going to go to the next one. May assign but not be released from liability under this contract. That's almost the one I always go with, is may assign but not be released. Because what this does is this gives you flexibility. So if you're going to buy it under, let's say you want to buy it under one entity, but then before closing, you want to do a different entity. Well, if you have this checked off, for you to change entities, again, you need an addendum to the contract, which you don't want. You don't want things to have to be signed, people asking questions, all that stuff. If you check this off, you can assign it to your own LLC and you don't need other people to sign off on it or approve it, So this one gives you the most flexibility and it still shows people that you're serious about it. So I would almost never recommend this first one, and you can go with the third one if you know which entity you're going to close under. But for flexibility purposes, the second one's the best in my opinion. Next, number 8, this is the title portion of the contract, and this is really where people always forget to check stuff off and always miss it. So I'm going to kind of go through this one. Number 1, statutory warranty deed is pretty much going to always be your regular just warranty deed. You see warranty deed right there, and there's nothing special about it. So you're going to go with this first one 99.9% of the time. I've never checked off anything besides this, and I've done over 300 transactions now. So that one it's safe to say that you're going to pretty much always go with that one right there. So now we're going to go down to the title evidence portion, still under the title section. So now each of these have to be checked off for you to have, considered a valid contract, right? So, and again, I get agents, they send me over offers all the time, and this is where they always forget to check stuff off. So 104 is huge. If you're the buyer and you're making an offer to the seller, most of the time you're going to make it clear that you're paying title because you want to choose title. So that's a buyer's expense. And then now this, so seller will deliver to buyer at buyer's expense and within, so you're reading this along, within blank days after effective date. Well, you don't want to do that because sometimes there can be delays to the closing and you have to extend the closing and then you need an addendum for this section. So what I almost always go with is right here. So seller will deliver to buyer at buyer's expense and within at least, and I do maybe 3 to 5. So 5, we'll go 5 for this example, at least 5 days before closing date. So that means that the seller is going to get their documents 5 days before the closing date. You could even make this 3, just gives title a little bit more flexibility. Title will typically send it out 7 days before the closing date, just so the seller has time to sign, notarize, and return the documents. And then now right here, line 107. A title insurance commitment by a Florida licensed title insurer setting forth those matters to be discharged by seller at or before closing and upon buyer recording the deed and owner's policy in the amount of the purchase price for fee simple title subject to the exception stated above. So it's going to almost always be, again, just like up here where you have a statutory warranty deed, right here, it's going to almost always be you're checking off this line 107, title insurance commitment. So now we don't need to check off 112 because we checked off this, and you only need to check one as it states right here. So you're just going to check off 107, then now we can go right down to title examination. And this, again, it's just a formality. You don't need to fill in anything right here because if you leave them blank, after receipt of title evidence, buyer will within 10 days, but no later than closing date, deliver written notice to seller of title defects. This is all just standard procedure, and you can leave all of this blank right here. I've never filled those in. Now, one of the more important ones is your due diligence period. So if you're planning to assign the property, I can tell you right away, you're going to need due diligence unless you already have a buyer that you've done deals with and you know that they're going to buy it. Then maybe you can get away with no due diligence period. But most of the time, if you're looking to assign this contract, you need a due diligence period to be able to, set up everything on your B2C end of the transaction. And you can either leave this blank and get default of 30 days, or you can fill in whatever number. So, if it's a home run deal, it's going to sell quick, maybe you can do 14 days. Or if you're unsure about it, maybe you need longer, 45 days, whatever the case may be. Me as a buyer, I typically want to get this number as little as possible. So if I know I'm buying a deal, I'll typically go anywhere between 0 to 2 days on my end. But for the sake of an assignment, we'll go with the default of 14, or not the default, but my default if I was assigning the contract. And then now down here, so we don't really need to check off anything else in here because mostly everything else just defaults. So right here, special assessment by public body, it's buyer if left blank. We'll pay installments due after closing. So after closing, if anything comes up, buyer's responsibility, that's fine. You're not going to really ever check that off unless, you're in a situation where there's open permits or something like that. Maybe you want to protect yourself and then you check off the seller. But still, most of the time you're just going to leave this blank. So nothing really needs to be checked here. One thing I did skip that I kind of want to go back to is seller and buyer cost. So if there's any associated cost with the transaction. So one thing you'll see from agents is, let's say they send you an offer, you're the seller and the buyer is sending you over an offer, the buyer's agent. Maybe there's a broker fee that's paid from the broker. So $500 broker fee is something that you would add to this line. And this is more so just for title, but you want to be able to see this as well, because sometimes what the broker can do is they can easily put it up here. And if you sign the contract, now you as the seller are responsible for paying that buyer's broker fee, which you don't ever want to happen. So pay attention to people filling out areas in there. And all the rest of this is really just, fancy legal words and all that. You don't really need to worry about anything in here. No action needs to be taken in here. Over here, sales and buyer's associate. You don't need to fill anything out in here if there's no realtors involved. And the only other thing I like to add, and there's a couple different things that you can do in here, but the main thing that I like to add is seller acknowledges that buyer is buying this property for investment purposes. I like to do this to protect myself, and one other thing I need to do because I'm a licensed realtor is I also need to include seller acknowledges that buyer holds an active Florida real estate license. So what this does, you're just disclosing that you are a licensed agent, if you are, and then right here, seller acknowledges that buyer is buying the property for investment purposes. Very simple lingo that states in there that, you're not acting like someone that you're not and, doing all this stuff. You want to disclose as much as you can to the seller and be transparent with them. Like, hey, I'm buying this property as an investment, Now what you do with that investment after you close is totally up to you. You disclosed it. So the day of closing, you fund the deal, title sends you over all the documentation, you own the property now. Nothing's stopping you from listing it on the market and selling it, and you would have no guilt in that circumstance because you showed them, hey, I'm buying it for investment purposes. And other than that, down here, buyer, we would just go back up to page 1 and you could take 1, 2, 3 investments. You could paste it down here and you could paste the seller for this example, advanced solutions, go down here for the seller. And now one other area where people mess up I'll see the signature line right here. The buyer will sign. It'll say 123 Investments LLC with a fancy signature through DocuSign. You don't ever want to do that. The authorized officer who should be signing on behalf of the LLC, they need their name right here. So there's no hiding it. You can't be 123 Investments LLC and that's your name. You know, that's not your name. That's your company name. And maybe John Doe is the owner of the company. John Doe should be signing right here and then dating. And it's the same with the seller. So if it's held under an entity, a trust, whatever, whoever the authorized party is, they're the ones that need to be signing, not the name of the entity. But aside from that, that's pretty much everything to do with a Florida vacant land contract. It's all pretty self-explanatory. One other thing, one bonus piece of advice I want to throw in here, per my broker attorney. So my brokerage, I've talked with other attorneys about this. Legally, for you to have a binding contract, none of these pages need to be initialed. You could forget to initial one, you could initial none. As long as you sign right here, you have a valid contract. So I thought that was really interesting because it's one thing I've always done. I've always made sure that people have signed and initialed every single page. And I found out that that's not needed. So really just a signature suffices. I would still get the initials. You know, you don't want anyone to be able to have an argument against a legal binding contract. But just a little fun fact there that none of these pages need to be initialed. They can just sign the last page and you have a valid contract. But with that being said, that is it for this video. Have a great day.